Hey y'all, today's show is a special crossover episode with Matt and David over at Pints with Jack. The four of us recently sat down and discussed the movie adaptation of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. However, this is part 2 of that discussion. Part 1 of the discussion is over in the Pints with Jack feed, which I'll link to below. So if you haven't listened to part 1, go check out Pints with Jack and you can return here for part 2. Well, hello, and welcome back to The Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is the second episode of our discussion on 20th Century Fox's The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Welcome back, Phil.
Thanks. Good to be back. Been a while.
It has been a while. We are in the midst of seasons 3 and 4 of our show. And I know some people that bumps people out that we're not talking about a book, but hey, we have some really special guests today. We have Matt and David from the Pints with Jack podcast, who we are so excited to be on the show.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it is fantastic. Excited to be here. Thanks for inviting us on.
Yeah, and Matt, this is your first time on the show, and David, you're a returning champion here from the first season.
Yes.
Yes, I'm the rookie. I am going to win the Most Improved Rookie Award of the year.
Very nice.
So I feel like we have to ask, what are you guys drinking?
We'll let the champion go first, I guess. Seniority.
Okay, that seems fair. I'm drinking some rum since we're on board the Dawn Treader. It only seemed appropriate.
I'm drinking some Wild Turkey American honey, which is exceptionally smooth liqueur blended with pure honey in bourbon whiskey. And I chose this, of course, because of the cinnamon flavor. It all reminded me of the book and the movie. They have to listen to they have to listen to the last part to be able to get that inside joke.
Daniel is drinking apple juice, I believe.
I am drinking apple cinnamon mead from Charm City Mead Works, which I mentioned back in part 1, which I'll speak about in a second, that I picked it for its the mead because there's mead that is drunk in the magician's house, and then it's also quite sweet, like the sweet water that we find at the end of the world.
And the joke was, when you did that on the last episode, I was like, yeah, that's exactly why I chose American honey as
Exactly, yeah. I'm sure people really love hearing us make the same jokes twice in a row.
It's a reward for listening to both episodes.
Yeah. And so speaking of that, we should mention that this is part 2 of our discussion of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So if for some reason listeners haven't heard part 1, go back and listen to that first, because we are going to jump right into our discussion of the movie. Although I think I cut you off, Phil. You didn't share with us what you're drinking.
I'm having water, and it's from the tap.
2020, that is not a good year.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2020.
So let's just kind of do a quick check-in and take our pulse on this movie so far. So we left off in the last episode with the Tempest had come. Lucy had done her magic spell to make her beautiful, and that's where we stopped. So let's just go around the table here, and how are you feeling? We'll start with you, Matt.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I loved that last scene. So let's just start with that. That was one of my favorite scenes from the movie. It was one that they took some, I guess, artistic discretion on and deviated from the book in the way they portrayed it. And I thought it was brilliant. So overall, I think we all were in agreement that we didn't love the movie adaptation, that there was some parts that were some struggles. And we talked about the Green Mist, not really loving that aspect of it, and some of the cheesier things they did. But that one was my favorite scene. And it was essentially where she wanted to see herself beautiful, and she essentially wished herself away in her current form. In the way they portrayed that, it just blew my mind, because that's such a good message. So I'm loving our discussion so far. I'm learning a lot, actually, because you guys are so knowledgeable on it. Obviously, I got all of David's wisdom when him and I did it on the book, but I'm loving hearing you and Phil, and it's been fantastic so far.
David, how about you?
For myself, I have called this the Rise of Skywalker of the Narnia movies.
So the best one?
I love the
Don't do that here. Please don't do that here.
We have you far out.
All right, this is Matt's first and last time on the show. No, I'm just kidding. We accept any and all Star Wars opinions. I do not want to add on to any kind of like hatred toward. We love Star Wars here. Sorry, I mean interrupt you. Star Wars gets me going.
It's fine. Yeah, I just think quite a lot of the dialogue has been kind of wonky. Pacing has been a little off, and the plot holes, and particularly the MacGuffins, suddenly, swords are important. Mist appearing from nowhere with no explanation. It's kind of frustrating. There are some wonderful moments that I have really enjoyed, feeling like I'm on board the Dawn Treader. There's some pain here as well.
How about you, Phil?
Yeah, so I will say that if it weren't for the fact that this was supposed to be an adaptation of the book, I rather enjoyed the film. I thought that maybe this is because I saw the BBC version shortly before, like a week or two before. So I was dreading prepping for this podcast because I thought
because he doesn't like Matt and David. He was like, oh, we got to talk to them.
No, I was looking forward to that part. I was like, I just don't want to watch the movie beforehand. And Daniel had kind of said a few things that made me think that this wasn't going to be very good, but I was surprised at how good it was compared to what I was expecting. But that doesn't change the fact that some of the things they changed just don't make a ton of sense. And now that David has pointed out a few more, it really doesn't make a lot of sense the more I think about it. So I did enjoy it, but I look forward to how Netflix is going to do it.
So it's basically you're saying that the secret to happiness is to have low expectations and not to listen to anything I say.
Ignorance is bliss.
The secret to marriage.
It's to not listen to anything David said.
Yes.
I think Marie would probably agree with that. Yeah.
The secret to be married to David Bates.
Yeah, there you go. I think for me, I don't think I made this analogy last time we talked about this, but this movie is, to keep talking more about Star Wars, is the opposite of the prequels for me, where I think I actually quite enjoy the execution of this movie, but I really dislike a lot of the main ideas, especially the ideas that they have changed, making this into this, we've got to save the whole world, there's some green mist, and just taking away from the adventure and the discovery of the book, which I would juxtapose with the prequels, which I would say have some really great, interesting, unique ideas and just very, very flawed in their execution. So it's the opposite where, I really just think they missed some pretty big fundamental aspects of this book in adapting it.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
Daniel, would you say this was a missed opportunity?
It was MIST opportunity. That's right.
David Bates, cringeworthy.
All right, so let's go ahead, and now that we kind of know where we stand, let's go right back into the story, and we have a really interesting place to pick up here. So we ended as the Dawn Treader has made it through the Tempest, and now it is landing at an island that is Goldwater, Deathwater, and Dragon Island all rolled up into one. So there's already been a shift in the narrative structure here where we've gone out of order. We already visited the Duffers back in the last episode, and we've seen the Magician's Book, and now we're just getting to Dragon Island, which is now combined with Goldwater and Deathwater Island. Did y'all like putting all of this together? Do you think it makes sense, or was this something we should have dragged out a little bit longer?
I'm going to let David take this one first.
I was actually mostly okay with it. It's a movie, they're not going to be able to have time for lots of different islands with different characters, so I was actually fine with them merging them a little bit.
I was fine with them merging. I did not like the reordering I didn't love the Duffers happening beforehand. It really confused me, threw me off, but the merging, I was fine with that as well. Although I will say I did not love the scene. I didn't like how it wasn't as much of a cave for Eustace with the dragon side of things. It was just this big treasure pit, maybe, if you want to call it that. I envisioned that extremely differently in my head.
Yeah, so you're right. They get to this volcanic island, which I thought that was really neat looking. That they had some differences in the settings of the various islands, and all of the Goldwater and / Deathwater stuff is occurring at the same time that Eustace has gone on. It's like this weird volcanic valley. Is that? I mean, that's probably the best way to describe it. It's not really a cave, but he still moves on. Puts on the bracelet at the same time that they're exploring this cavern. This scene was really interesting as Caspian and Edmund fought, over the gold and the discovery of, wait, that's not a statue, that's an actual person. This is where it takes me out of it a little bit with Ben Barnes' age, because he's fighting with Edmund over who's the real king, and there's like a 10-year difference between the two of them. It's like, dude, just call seniority. You're fine, man.
Punch him.
There's only one of us that shaves.
Yes.
Easy now, David.
Yeah, I thought...
I don't shave.
Oh.
Yeah, I didn't like that. There was absolutely no puzzle. They work it out almost immediately. They know it's Restamar. And also, they're not in the slightest bit sad in the book. It's quite a horrific moment when they've realized what had happened to this man. Whereas in the movie, it's like, okay, we've got to get his sword.
Yeah, where's the sword? It's sad he died. Where's his sword?
And they get to pick up the sword, and it doesn't change to gold because it's magic. It's what I said in the previous episode. When in doubt, magic just solves everything.
Magic answers all your questions.
And also, as I said in the previous episode, the mist is blamed for everything. So the fight that they have, we're led to believe by the mist appearing that it's the mist that is influencing them, rather than it's a just normal character dynamics of that they have to work out.
Yeah, exactly. Which is an issue that I think these filmmakers missed here, because again, going back to there's not like a character journey for most of these characters. It's mostly just defeating the mist, and any bad things that occur, we're defeating the mist. And when Phil and I read through this, one chapter at a time, we really saw these little episodes pop up that would focus on one character at a time. So Caspian is really the main focus on the Lone Islands. We see Lucy at the magician's house. This is kind of a big moment for Edmund to shine here on Deathwater Island. And then we actually have Eustace on Dragon Island. And each one of those characters really gets to shine in those adventures on the various islands. And here, none of those character arcs really happen. It's just, we just have to defeat the mist. We just have to overcome the mist. It's not, we have to overcome ourselves. And I wonder if that's taking away of some of the Christian elements of this book. It's like, no, the issue is the sin within, right? Instead of this, thing on the outside. Obviously, there is an enemy, but there seems to be very little occurring in the hearts of our characters.
Wow, that. I didn't even think of it. That was really, I agree completely. I didn't think of that in the moment when I was watching the movie.
And also, noticeably, no Aslan. It's not the appearance of Aslan that brings them to their senses. It's Lucy jumping in between two squabbling boys.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about how little. And I think one of the things that hurts Phil and I is that we watched the BBC right before we watched this. And you're right, Aslan shows up in the BBC version, but not in this. It's just Lucy, and who also, as we're reading in, I think it's chapter 8 in the book, that she's herself is even struggling a little bit as well too there. And you're right, just kind of having her take on the Aslan role when Aslan is already in a pretty reduced role. I call this more of his like Esther role here in this movie, in this book. And so it's a bummer that he doesn't get to intervene himself. So all of our characters, they do make it out. They now have this sword, and concurrently with this, you have Eustace's reveal that he is the dragon. He kind of is flying around the ship, and then he picks up. Who is it that he picks up? I've already forgotten. Is it
Edmund?
It's Edmund. And then I loved this reveal. This was really fun. And then he flies him over where he has burned with his fire breathing, I am Eustace, into the ground, which I thought that was a really fun reveal.
I really liked it as well. It's the sort of thing that I thought I might not like. That's not like it is in the book. It's a bit over the top, but no, I really enjoyed it. Although you notice that the dragon does make a pointless trip to the boat. So when the dragon first appears, it flies out to the boat, and they all start shooting arrows at it. Reap Cheap stabs it. It then goes back. It then goes and picks up Edmund. It then flies back out to the ship just to do a loop, and then takes him back to the island to show him his message.
You got to get that cool shot in there with the boat, man.
Exactly.
I didn't love how in the book, Eustace as the dragon just came very much shoulders forward, head down, feeling pretty defeated, trying to reveal that he's saddened and he's not the dragon is not a bad thing. He's not bad as a dragon. And in the movie, it tries to play this beginning part where you don't know, and that he might actually be terrible and awful. And I personally didn't actually like that as much. I liked the way he did it in the book in a much more humble type manner.
It's Hollywood, man.
I know.
and I do think it works for the character in the book, but so in the BBC version, they follow pretty much word for word the book, and the scene I feel like falls pretty flat with watching this animatronic dragon try to nod his head like no or yes, and maybe it's just the special effects at the time, but it doesn't work the same way as this kind of dragon with his tail between his legs showing up in humility. It's more just like what is happening here, because you don't have Lewis narrating what's occurring in Eustace's head, and so that's the part that's difficult, and so I didn't mind it.
I'll have to watch the BBC now.
Oh, don't worry, dude. I've got it scheduled. We're going. You need to be punished by experiencing my childhood, because I watched these when they came out live on TV.
So David, I've been meaning to ask you this. I'm glad we get to do it on the show. What is your exposure to the BBC version? Because for me, I watched it on VHS from the church library.
I watched them on TV as they were being released.
Wow, on the telly?
Yep, I am that old.
It's awesome.
But back to things that didn't work. The thing I didn't like was when Eustace comes into the valley with all of the treasure, he pushes a skeleton out of the way, Lord Octesian, just to get his bracelet. Why? It seemed too callous even for Eustace, and he's in a valley of treasure. I'm going to take the treasure that doesn't require me to touch a dead body.
Yeah. and even for him, too, this whole theme throughout the book is that Eustace hasn't read the right books and is therefore, he's not brave, he's a coward about everything. So it actually doesn't make sense that he would go near a skeleton.
Right, and he has a hygiene award.
Yeah, that's true. He wouldn't want to do that.
Thank you, Phil. Phil, you're on my team now. I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Now that I see all the little details, I can't not see that. You've changed my mind.
So after all these adventures on this particular island, before they leave, there is the stargazing that occurs. And I think this is a really great scene between both Eustace as a dragon, who obviously can't talk, and Reepicheep. And I think Reep is fine in this movie. I don't think he shines the same way he does in the book. And this is one of the scenes that's a huge standout that reminds us why we love this character so much.
I agree. I loved this scene. Actually, this was one up there with the Lucy one I felt it nailed what was communicated in the book very well. The tenderness, because in the book, if you remember, there was animosity. I thought it was more well played out in the book than in the movie between Reepicheep and Eustace, because as we talked about in the last part, it was over the orange and it was more him trying to help him. So it was more of like a friendly fight, except in the book, it was not quite as friendly. And here they did a really good job with just communicating that the beauty of that relationship, and really someone, meaning like Reepicheep going to Eustace in a point where Eustace doesn't deserve a lot of kindness and mercy. And Reepicheep showed a ton of grace. So you can have this person that can be both about justice. I think this is what I really liked about justice and honor and integrity, but then at the same time, an incredible amount of grace. And so much today you'll see, even in the divides within a church of more liberal or conservative, like justice versus mercy, and they're at each other's throat. And if you have more justice, you have less mercy, and if you have more mercy, you have less justice. Like Reepicheep showed both, and I loved this scene of just the mercy and the grace of him.
Did you guys notice that you could see Aslan in the stars?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, go back, take a look. You can see the lion in there.
Oh, that's cool. No, I was too busy looking at the blue star to notice Aslan up there.
Well, before we get to the blue star, I have two more things I have to say I couldn't stand.
No, go for it, please.
The bracelet was removed so easily.
Yes.
That is true.
That got me, David.
Dumb.
Got me.
And also the bracelet had somehow grown with Eustace.
Yeah, it doesn't seem super painful on him.
Because you see Lucy walking away and it's this massive thing. And also that Lucy has this conversation with Gale when they're looking up at the stars. And Aslan is mentioned with zero explanation, and Gale seems to know who he is. It's like, okay.
Do you think that could be... So we don't know much about Gale and Rince's family on the Lone Islands, and there seems to be a lot of unjust things occurring there, especially with slavery. But I mean, could it be that they're, a family who is loyal to Aslan or something, that is something... They're kind of maybe in a place that maybe they're even persecuted for I'm getting a little too close to real world stuff, but I didn't make, to me, I was fine being, oh, she knows all about Aslan. Maybe they all don't, or, Gumpus didn't, but she could.
Well, I just look back at the events of Prince Caspian, where all knowledge of Aslan and the old Narnians was basically obliterated by the Telmarines.
Yeah, you're right. That's true. And I was forgetting that the Lone Islands doesn't know about this yet, right? So people could be talking about Aslan back, around Baruna or around actually, obviously not Cair Paravel, but around the land of Narnia. But you're right. You're totally right. That news hasn't made it to the Lone Islands. And
yet they meet a crew that is populated at least by a minotaur and a faun.
And no one freaks out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There needs to be more people like Eustace just fainting.
Yeah. It's the people of the Lone Islands like, what is this about? Which, by the way, there aren't any Narnian creatures in the book on the Dawn Treader. Isn't it only populated by human? Well, not real humans, but there still are humans, just not from our world.
As far as I know, yeah.
Except for Reepicheep. But
I don't think any are particularly called out, apart from Reepicheep, yeah.
I didn't mind that addition of more. I would be fine with like a faun in there or something else, and that's fine with me.
Particularly a faun that can do somersaults and ninjutsu.
Exactly.
That's cool.
Well, let's move on. With the Dawn Treader, as they begin following the Blue Star, they get a warning from a water nymph. It's pretty ominous as it looks up at Lucy. And they also run out of wind. They don't run out, but there's no wind. And so they're not able to move forward. And that is when we get the big heroic moment of Eustace wrapping his tail around the ship and pulling it forward with his brute strength.
Fun, but dumb. And an easy resolution, but I'm okay with it.
That wasn't in the book, right? That was not in the book.
No, they don't leave the island in the book with a dragon. I mean, all of Eustace's big arc there occurs completely on the island in the course of 3 chapters, and by the time they leave, he's a boy again.
And it's because he was a burden, because they couldn't leave with him because they don't know when they're next going to be reaching land. How are they going to feed him? All of these things are the things that actually help in Eustace's transformation as he starts to realize what a pest he's become, even before he became a dragon.
They missed that a little bit.
The two things that happen as with Eustace as a dragon is that he is, the big one is this transformation where Aslan comes and he turns him back into a human through removing those scales and all the pain that takes. And it's such a beautiful picture. But there's a more subtle thing, like you just said, David, where Eustace is realizing, oh my goodness, I am a terrible pest. And it takes him to actually be a giant dragon to realize how much he is hindering the crew and to also see their kindness towards him. They're not going to leave him here. He's been nothing but miserable the whole time, and yet they are literally pausing their search for the 7 lords so that they don't leave him here and abandon him. And it's those two things that happen together that change his character. And it seems like the filmmakers only focused on, which is a beautiful scene, but only focused on the transformation back into a human, which does happen. It's a really big deal. I mean, they move it to the climax of the film. So they obviously recognized it was important, but they seem to miss the more subtle elements of the transformation as well.
I think this is an issue that happens when you have a story that's so well constructed that if you remove one piece or put it somewhere else, a lot of other things fall with it. And so they tried to piece it back together here. And it's an entertaining movie, but it certainly is not what Lewis had in mind for a lot of this stuff.
I think it could have possibly have worked, though. I think keeping Eustace as a dragon longer, and if we are going to head in the direction that this movie was going into, I thought that was okay. And they could have had his transformation right at the end. But it needed to be earned a little bit more.
I'm also curious what motivated that decision to have him remain a dragon. I wondered if it was a budget thing where if they're going to put all the work into making a dragon and model it and get the crew for that and everything. I wondered if they wanted to use it.
Wasn't Game of Thrones really big around this time? Every good show has to have some dragons.
Right. Like, oh, we got a dragon. Let's put it in a few more scenes.
Remind me the scene with the sea creature. In the book, he was already undragoned, correct?
Yeah, that happens in 2 narrow escapes. And I think it is after he's already been undragoned and they just push off the tail of the sea serpent as opposed to this weird looking thing that's, the climax of the movie.
I wonder if they're trying... because he helped with that. I wonder if they were trying to show, maybe they thought it was unrealistic that this ship would somehow get away from this huge serpent without the help of a dragon.
And it was Eustace's first brave act as a boy. He attacks the serpent with Caspian's second best sword, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems to me, and I think it's fine to talk about it here, although I think we should look back at the end and maybe bring it back up. But I do wonder if this book was always doomed to fail because from an adaptation perspective, because of the structure of this book. I think one of the things that the writers, and by the way, we mentioned that we were kind of doing an Avengers thing here by bringing together our two podcasts. The guys who wrote this movie, y'all, wrote Infinity War and Endgame.
What?
I'm not joking. They wrote all three. Sorry, I know I'm kind of getting us off course here. We talked about you already being Chris Evans. I'm not joking. They wrote the first Avenger, the Winter Soldier, Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame.
That's
oh my goodness.
Isn't that weird?
That's just affirmation that my statement was correct earlier.
Exactly. Sorry, I know that's a little off topic, but
I'll take it.
Yeah. So obviously, here's the thing. Those two guys, Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, they're talented writers. Okay. I mean, they've written good movies. It's not like they are not talented writers and, they just can't write a good movie. They have clearly shown that they can write good films. The issue for me is that maybe it's just that this book, because of the way its arcs work and the narrative structure of it, it just doesn't work as a film. And that's why they have to drag out Eustace's transformation. Because one of the things I brought up as we went through this whole last season was that, Eustace, after he transforms back into a human and he's not fully rid of all of his negative qualities, but he's mostly, changed. He really doesn't appear much more than a line in about each chapter. And I think it's a testament to his character, how much we remember him from this book, when really he plays a very limited role after chapter 7. And so I wonder if the filmmakers didn't want that to happen because it might feel weird in a movie. And so they have to really drag out his character arc.
I think you're right. And I think that there were going to have to be some quite major pace changes to turn this into a movie. And like I said, I actually think this could have worked. I just don't think we had enough earlier on to see Eustace's transformation beginning, so that then at the end, when he does transform, that we feel like there's been a real payoff.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, speaking of payoffs, let's go ahead and move into ramping up into the climax of this movie. So the Dawn Treader, it lands on Ramandu's Island, and pretty quickly, the whole crew makes it to Aslan's table. We spent a lot of time talking about Aslan's table, and we talked a lot about different Lewis scholars who looked at this as the Eucharist of Narnia, is what a lot of people looked at in here. I didn't feel like any of that translated to it, which is one of my favorite parts of the book, which I was a little bummed about. And instead, the whole focus is on putting these swords at the table and lighting everything up, into a big blue light. What did y'all think about this?
Well, I wanted to ask people, do you notice that we go to Ramandu's Island? And who do we never meet through the entirety of the movie?
That's right.
Ramandu. Call it something else if you're going to do that. Weird. Yeah, it was a little strange, and apparently there are orcs on that island because their swords glow blue.
Very nice.
And also, just once again, they just didn't care about the lords. It was all about getting their swords.
Yeah, I'll say it felt rushed. I felt it could have been developed more. I felt it could have been more of a message there. It just didn't play as much of a prominence. It didn't stick out to me as much in the movie as it did in the book.
Yeah, it felt more, instead of being kind of the climax of the journey, instead it felt like, it's just this kind of stepping stone to get to the real climax, which is a big battle. And I think that's not what Lewis was going for. The really interesting thing about the Dawn Treader as a book is that this climax at Ramandu's Island happens with like 3 chapters to go, and then the rest of it is just literally smooth sailing to the east.
Yeah, I guess I guess we have to cut him a little slack. I'm wondering if it's just a movie has to end on the climax. And they were like, we can't do this.
That's fine. It's just that this island doesn't really give us a whole lot apart from we've got 3 more swords and they have to apparently come back here. And we have an exposition dump by Ramandu's daughter, who is now apparently a shape-shifting star. And was it just me? Or was that the glow around her just kind of overkill? She kind of reminded me of the blue fairy.
It was a little much.
I like that she's given a name, so we finally have something to call her other than Ramandu's daughter, which is just, it's a long thing to say. But she's given the name Liliandil. And there's a little bit of conversation between her and Caspian, which I thought that part worked out rather well. But for the most part, she is just a means for the plot to move forward instead of an actual character.
How about when she turns into a glowing ball and then ascends into the sky?
Best scene in the movie.
Hands down.
I actually heard that Liliandil was actually a name given to her by Douglas Gresham.
Oh,
really?
That's cool. Do you know any of, the etymology of why he chose this word or what it means, or just it sounded cool?
I'm not sure. I mean, it sounds very Tolkien-esque.
It does, doesn't it?
Oh, and there was also another plot change at this point, because the reason that the lords are asleep isn't because they touched the stone knife, but because they threatened violence. Which is like, I think either don't include the stone knife at the table and just run with that, or have them touch the knife. It just seemed like an odd thing to have the knife there and then actually have nothing to do with any of the plot.
Yeah. And just stick with they touch the knife part.
That would have been the simpler route.
So then the Dawn Treader leaves Ramandu's island, and this is where we head to the Dark Island, and it does get very dark here. This is, to me, this is where the movie just really falls apart. All of the plot issues we've had that have kind of been more in the background really come to the forefront here, and I think the movie struggles here. So the Dawn Treader sails to the Dark Island, and the first part I think actually goes really well. They sail into the island. Caspian gives a pretty great speech, and we hear the Lord Roop as the green mist is kind of creeping along around the Dawn Treader, and it is very frightening. His screaming out for them, and you get this sense that he is just not well, both mentally and physically, and all of that. I think the tension there is ramped up really well, and I like that.
I liked the repetition of the for Narnia, because that cry was in each of the movies. Mm-hmm. I actually thought his speech was kind of dull, but that was just me. He also seems to think that they can actually save the people that the mist has taken. I would have just assumed they were all dead at this point. One thing that I did like the fact that they did it, but again, I think the execution wasn't right, because Lucy's arc in this movie has all been about accepting who you are. Mm-hmm. And it's around this time that Gale says, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. And she says, no, when you grow up, you should be just like you. I don't know, maybe it was just the placement of that conversation. I completely missed it on the first viewing.
So wait, you were saying you didn't like that conversation between the two of them?
I completely missed it when I was first there.
Yeah, so did I.
I like, when I went and watched it a second time, I realized what the filmmakers were doing. They were trying to complete Lucy's arc. She has now learnt her lesson after trying the spell, and she realizes that she shouldn't waste her time wishing to be somebody else. She should just be who she is. Mm-hmm. And she's now passing that wisdom on to a younger generation. So I liked that, but it just seemed like an odd place to put it.
I do have to say, the more we go through this, Daniel, you're pointing out of the importance of discovery is just becoming more and more transparent to me. The discovery of Caspian and his role, the discovery of Lucy. I mean, the discovery in all of this is really apparent.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I really like about the book and its exploration of discovery, from a thematic standpoint, is that it matches a lot of our our faith journey too. I mean, I think about so much of, I want it to be, I'm not that old at all, but, so far in my life, it's not like there's this one long arc of, this is exactly me. It's not, it's like little things where the Lord is teaching me this for this season, and then it's a new thing, but I still have that other thing in the back I still have to work on. And then that's the process of sanctification. And so I think Lewis does that really well. I don't know if that's exactly what he was aiming for, but that resonates with me. Because it's kind of like highs and lows, and some parts are more exciting than others, and some, and instead, as the movie adapts it tries to make it this one big, huge thing, and that's just not the feeling I got from the book when I read it personally.
Yep, I agree completely.
So yeah, we got to talk about this battle. So the sea serpent appears in the green mist, and the way that it works is that we learn that all of our dreams come true, which this matches up with chapter 12, the Dark Island in the book. Except that Edmund, it's all his fault. He dreams of a sea serpent, and then it appears, which I really didn't like, because it kind of puts some of this on, like, dude, come on, man. Like, obviously you couldn't really help it, but everyone that dies here, that's kind of blood on your hands, Like, why didn't you think up like a pretty unicorn or something that just wasn't going to kill everybody?
Well, did anybody else get a really strong Ghostbusters vibe from that scene?
I've never seen Ghostbusters.
Oh my goodness.
I haven't either. While we're admitting stuff.
Oh my, yes, I have seen Ghostbusters.
Did you see Ghostbusters, or did you see the Rose Byrne version?
I have not seen the new one. I've seen Ghostbusters 1 and 2 from the 80s.
Okay.
So in that, the big baddie will choose the form of what somebody is thinking, and it ends up being Ray, thinking about the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
Yep.
It was exactly the same thing.
Oh, great. Now I don't have to watch it anymore. Thanks.
Oh, you totally should, man.
I'm kidding.
It's great. It's a great movie. But yeah, and I just thought that was, I don't know. There's an interesting thing that could be happening there that is somewhat intriguing to me, which is that the thing that they are battling is coming from within themselves. And I think there's some really interesting ideas to explore there. The movie doesn't choose to explore any of those. Instead, it just becomes a big fight scene. But there's a part of like, oh my gosh, that's actually, let's explore this, right? Let's even look at Edmund from the perspective of the last 3 films, where it really, most of the bad things that happen in the first movie are because of him. He then, in the second movie, is figuring out who he is now that he has been redeemed through the blood of Aslan, and is trying to figure out what is it like with him and Peter, and he's competing with him. And then here in this movie, he's really come into this hero role, right? And there's an interesting idea to play with, and that the last big thing they have to defeat is something that comes from within Edmund, and yet it's just a big fight,
It was kind of wasted. And speaking of wasted, the Albatross, when Lucy prays, Aslan, if you've ever loved us, please help us now. Just the Albatross appears, and that's it. Nothing. No courage, dear heart. No, just, why bother?
I have to imagine that if you have not read the book, you're like, wait, why did they put that in there? That doesn't make any sense. Maybe the director just really liked an albatross. I was like, let's throw that in there. It's very unclear what's happening in that moment if you have not read the book. So this fight continues between the sea serpent and the crew of the Dawn Treader. They try to smash the serpent against the rock, and Eustace jumps into the fight, and he is thrown out of the darkness in this fight to an island. And it is unclear to me if this island is literal or figurative. Like, I don't know if he's actually in a physical place.
You've been watching too much Lost.
Well, it's got Mists Island. It's basically Lost.
Do you guys think this is an island that is just nearby the Dark Island and Ramondu's Island, or is this somewhere like it doesn't feel like it's in the same place?
I interpret it as more metaphorical, or kind of a stand aside, not meant to be literal.
I just thought it was a sandbar that was somewhere nearby.
Okay,
but I'm happy either way.
Yeah. Far enough away that it's not in the mist or in the darkness itself.
Well, let's talk about it more before we go back to the big fight on the Dark Island, because this is probably, I would say, one of the most pivotal scenes of the book is the undragoning of Eustace, and it's done very differently here for lots of different reasons. It's in a different place in the book. It is kind of hard to show a dragon rip the scales off, and even the way that it's presented in the book, Eustace is telling the story to Edmund a day after it occurs, and we're actually now seeing it in the movie in real time. How did y'all think this scene was handled?
So I love the scene itself, meaning just in general book movie, that concept of undragoning. I heard of that, learned of that, knew of that before I read the book, because it was brought up, I believe, in one of the talks at North Carolina. And that concept itself of undragoning your false self, the monstrous parts that you've put on, I absolutely love it. And so I was a little disappointed with the scene itself. I thought it conveyed that idea well, but I for one, appreciated in the book how it showed Eustace struggling longer. I just thought it showed him do a couple little scratches, and then Aslan comes in to save the day. Where in the book, you get the sense that he's actually scratching and succeeding to some degree, and then it comes back. And then he's succeeding a little bit, then it comes back, which seems to be more fitting of our journey with sin. It's like, I'm going to white knuckle this. And honestly, you get a little bit of the way. And then you realize you can't do it on your own. But it's not that quick of a realization, because you have to go down the white knuckling path first to overcome sin, temptation, vice, before you realize you put your hands up and say, I can't do it. I need God's grace. And so I didn't think it conveyed that very well. And I also didn't like how Aslan was scratching the sand and magically going over.
I would just add that I think it then got even worse when Eustace then went through the standard Disney transformation. It was like something out of Beauty and the Beast, where he then flies up into the sky and there's lots of pixie dust around him, and yeah, he's then changed. One thing I will say, I really liked the way the scene began with Eustace opening up his eye and we see the reflection of Aslan there.
Yeah, that was a cool shot.
That was great. The rest of it was just boring.
I think there are two things that probably younger audiences find exciting, and it's transformations with like a flame or mist or explosion type thing. And the other one is just like a climactic battle. And I loved them when I was younger, but once you see them over and over again, you kind of don't enjoy them as much. And I feel like this is yet another movie that kind of falls victim to that. They have to add a climactic battle, and they have to have a transformation look like this. And this could have been done so many ways. And I would have loved to see a version a little more true to the book, but with updated special effects compared to the BBC.
I love the BBC version personally.
Yeah, I like it a lot too.
Doesn't need to be improved.
I'm also not a huge fan of this scene, and I think it just, I don't know. Yeah, it just misses the mark in so many ways. So I don't need to get into it because you guys have already said it. But it is still, there's some really interesting visuals that are occurring. And I still like it when I compare it to what we're about to go back to, which is the White Witch and the Sea Serpent. So let's go back to Dragon Island, where the crew of the Dawn Treader is fighting the Sea Serpent.
Dark Island.
Oh yeah, that's what I meant. They're on the Dark Island where they're fighting, and the Sea Serpent is there. Which, as they continue to fight, there's a really interesting image where it kind of comes up like a cobra would, and it like unravels these like weird legs inside of it, which is absolutely terrifying. That is easily the scariest thing we've ever seen in Narnia. And I can't imagine like a 7 or 8 year old who's watching this movie is going to be a fan of that. But I thought that was an interesting visual amidst some other stuff I really don't like. But it's here that the White Witch returns. She's now green. She's the green mist witch here. And she's here to tempt Edmund. And I feel like this is, of many of the decisions made, this one might be the most controversial. She comes back and she's trying to tempt Esmond. I'm trying to combine them. Hey, it wouldn't be a Lamppost listener if I didn't mispronounce someone's name. So she's trying to tempt Edmund to come back to her. And Tilda Swinton's a phenomenal actress. I mean, she always does well in this role. I love her in this role. But in my opinion, this just feels so inappropriate for this movie. And it's like the producers of the movie couldn't let her go after the first movie.
It kind of reminds me of the movie Dracula Dead and Loving It, which is a spoof. And they're trying to kill this vampire, and each time they stab it through the heart, all this blood appears. And it's just, she's nearly dead. She's dead enough. I didn't even understand what she was trying to tempt him to. If he said, okay, sure, I'm on board, what difference does that make to anything?
Yeah, she probably would have said, well, I wasn't expecting that. I can't come back.
It wasn't a temptation. I think it would have been so much better if it had been about them seeing their nightmares and this giving the mist strength. Mm-hmm. And we see the serpent being formed as the crew members become more and more fearful. Then they each have their own individual battle with their own like personal demons. And then we start seeing the sea serpent weakened, and sure, then you can throw in some magic swords if you really insist. I just didn't get the point. I didn't understand why she was tempting him. To what? What difference would that have made?
Yeah, it feels like she's included just so they can put her on the poster of the film. You know, I know that sounds very cynical, but I mean, she's all over a lot of the marketing for this movie, and she appears in maybe 3 minutes of it. And so I think it's hey, Tilda Swinton is a famous actress. She's probably Liam Neeson and Simon Pegg are both behind voice roles. She's the most famous actor in this movie, and so I think it's just putting a face on a poster and stuff. It doesn't seem like she plays any kind of pivotal role here. And like you said, David, there is a story here. There is some motivation that could be going on as Edmund sees his worst fear. I mean, maybe even if you need to include her, it's what Edmund sees is not a sea serpent. That's not his worst dream. His worst dream is like his mistake of siding with the White Witch, when they first came to Narnia. And then if you really have to include her, you could still, I'm not saying I want this, but you could include her as the big bad at the end of this movie. Not that she's actually there, but that it's Edmund's fear of her, right? That is bringing her back. But instead, she's like it's unclear. Was she the mist the whole time? I'm actually not sure.
I actually think they were trying to set this up for the silver chair. And since we have two people here who haven't read that, I'm not going to say anything more. But I think that was what they had an eye to. I think, aside from the fact of getting a little bit of star power and sticking her face on the posters, I think that's what they were trying to do.
That is such a great point, David. I had not thought about any of the characters from the next book. I can't say anything else besides that. Man, that's a phenomenal point. I really think that you're onto something there.
So, David, in the original Spider-Man, the first 3 that they made before they remade him and then remade him again and then remade him a 4th time, there are all these references to Mysterio, who later appeared in Marvel movies, but there are all these cameos by the guy who's going to play Mysterio in the 4th movie, and they kept doing it, and it doesn't make any sense because that movie never happened. And this seems to be pretty close to that.
Exactly. We sort of have a vestigial organ in this movie, and I think it was for another movie that never got made.
Yeah.
Well, the sea serpent is finally destroyed. The people return from the mist, and the climax is over. Any last thoughts here before we head on to our final couple of scenes?
No, I cannot wait for these final scenes.
Okay, I'll keep my complaints short. Why does Peter's sword, why does it glow? It wasn't part of the other ones. The whole sky beam, dumb. Lucy stating the obvious, the spell, it's lifting. It's like, well, thank you. That's pretty helpful. The people return. Why did the mist need them in the first place? And why is Eustace suddenly in the water by the ship? He was on Ramondu's Island a moment ago. And the thing that really irritated me is the children all take credit for it. It's because they think it's something that they did. It had nothing to do with Aslan.
Mm.
And when they jump into the water and discover that the water's sweet and Aslan's country is right there, they say, well, we've come this far. This was what Reapercheek's heart longed for.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I want to talk a little bit about what you mentioned with Aslan. I remember when the first 2 movies came out, as someone who was already familiar with the books, I know that some of the criticism that I read for it was a lot of people felt like Aslan was this kind of like Deus Ex Machina at the end of it. Like, oh, he just saves the day and they just have this random character show up and he fixes everything. And it's usually something you want to avoid in a narrative, right? But it's like, no, actually, if Aslan is a supposal of God, that's exactly what it is. That's how eucatastrophes work. And that's, it's all these kind of things. And I wonder if there is a thought by the filmmakers here to actually pull, already Aslan doesn't play a large role in this book, but to pull Aslan kind of away from saving the day and letting the main characters save the day instead. I wonder if that was part of it. I don't know if I don't think it's a good move, but I wonder if that's what they're thinking.
That makes sense. I think you're right.
All right. Well, let's go to some happy stuff. I think I have a sense that we might be a little bit more happy with these last few scenes here. So we completely skip the penultimate chapter of this book. There really is no sailing through the Silver Sea. We don't see any of the sea people or anything. We go straight to the last chapter, which is a bummer for me because of that's my favorite chapter in the book, but also I feel like that would be the weirdest chapter to try to adapt. And so I understand that. But it is still wonderful to see all the lilies and, see them go through this Silver Sea.
I did enjoy the scene when Reapercheek gets in the water and realizes it's sweet.
Mm-hmm. And so pretty quickly, it's like after this climax has occurred, they get into their small boats and they sail to the edge of the world. And interestingly enough, Caspian goes with them, which is a pretty big part of that final chapter, that Caspian is not allowed to go with them because he has to stay and he has a responsibility as king, but he does go with them here. Were y'all okay with that choice of Caspian being allowed to go?
I was fine with it.
Wait, I might be mixing these two up. So didn't Caspian in the movie go to the scene with the big wave and the beach, but then was supposed to go back, or no? Did he went forward? I thought he went back.
No, he still goes back, but in the book, he doesn't even get to go to that final island. It's just the children and Reepicheep. Remember, Caspian, he kind of says, "I'm going to stop being king. I'm going into Aslan's country." As people are asking, "Wait, are you not going to be king anymore?" And he goes back into his cabin, and he gets a talking to from Aslan, who reminds him that his responsibility is to the kingdom of Narnia. It's not like discovery only goes so far, but at the end of the day, he still has a responsibility, and he can't just walk away from that responsibility. And then in a kind of a funny way, he's reminded, "Oh yeah, and remember you have Ramandu's daughters waiting for you too." And he's like, "Oh, okay, I think I might be all right."
I do remember that. Oh, that was great. Classic man.
So let me hear your thoughts on this final scene as Aslan comes and meets them at the world's end.
I loved the reveal. I really liked seeing his shadow. Mm-hmm. I loved the beach. I loved the waves, and I loved the glimpse of Aslan's country. Oh, it feels so nice to say nice things about this movie again.
Yeah, and my favorite line of them all was it wasn't the last line per se, but when Aslan mentions, when Reepicheep gives his speech of how this is what everything was made for, and Aslan says, "My country is made for people with hearts like yours," or something like that. I mean, that brought tears to my eyes, honestly. That probably made the most lasting impact on me of the entire movie and book. It's about the heart of courage and adventure and striving for goodness. And it's not, because none of that was about the actions of Reepicheep. Of course, his actions followed, because if your heart is in that place, your actions are going to follow from that. But it's all about your heart's desire, and desiring, which is very Lewis-esque, very much of The Great Divorce. It's like, what is your heart's deepest desire? Is it to do the will of God? So I loved that.
And it was very convenient because there was a mouse-sized coracle right there by the wave.
Of course there is. God.
Yeah, Aslan put it there.
Yeah. Magic.
Said, I left this on Burnt Island, but since you didn't actually land on that one, I just brought it here.
This is called God of the Gaps, David. How'd it get here? God.
The one thing I was quite impressed by is the fact that they didn't cut out the part where Aslan says that he's in our world, and that the kids came to this world to know him a little here so that they would know him better in our world.
I was thinking the exact same thing, David, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm just being really cynical and just, but I really was. I was surprised that made it in. I thought for sure that, if you're going to cut, they've changed the book in so many ways. Like, they're going to take out that. It's a pretty clear religious reference, and so I didn't think it was going to make it. And I loved that. And I think it really tied together. It gave a sense of finality to this third film. And obviously at this point, they thought they were going to make another one. We even heard that from Douglas Gresham, that there were plans for the fourth, but it actually works as the final chapter in a movie trilogy. To be like, hey, actually, let me tell you, everything you did here was because I exist back home. And I liked that as an ending. It really worked.
Yeah, and that's a big Christian theme in general. Like, so much of our journey in life, we've mentioned this, I believe, on the last one, but is getting to know God. And then as we get to know him, because Lewis talks about this with authenticity and learning about ourselves, we only will receive our authentic self once we go to God for his sake and his sake alone. And that's a process of learning about him, getting to know him. And in scripture, when it talks about knowing God, it uses a Hebrew word that is the same word used for when a man and a wife know each other intimately in a sexual sense, like in a coming together. And so that knowing is a deep thing. And so I really like that here. I mean, we are called to know Christ. And I thought that I thought they communicated that very well.
I think so too. It's a great point.
So then, Reepicheep flies. he rides. Here's the thing. He does fly in the BBC version. It's like a UFO like beams him up. That's like the special effect. And so that's what I was thinking of. But he rides the wave to the crest of the wave, sails over, which is beautiful, and then the three our three humans return, and it's a really well done scene. And actually, I really think all three of these movies have done the travel back to our world scenes very well. Even Caspian's, which has like the Regina Spektor song, and like it's Susan's fawning over Caspian, which I don't love. It's still done really well, and they have this sense of melancholy, of being sad of leaving Narnia, but knowing that this isn't your home to begin with. They always knew they had to eventually go back, and the movies all capture that feeling very, very well.
It was the point in this movie when they did some real visual storytelling in the looks on the faces of each of the actors as to how Eustace handles the picture of the Narnian boat with much more reverence. It was, if they could have done more of that throughout the movie, show, don't tell. Don't just tell us how you're feeling. Actually let us see it, set up the scene so that we feel what the characters feel.
Yeah. I'm looking at some screen caps from that scene, and I see exactly what you're talking about. Just the way he looks at the picture for a few moments and then places it back on the wall with much more care, like you were saying. And also the way Lucy looks at it one more time, and you can just read so much into the way she's looking at the picture. And then she kind of leaves, and the picture goes out of view, and then the door closes. It's just very well done.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also treated to Eustace's mother calling up the stairs to tell him that Jill Pole has dropped in for a visit, which, if you've read the next book, that raises some more questions, but it was cute, so I'm going to let it slide.
Yeah, it doesn't quite make sense, but it's nice. It's nice to remember, hey, there's a story that this story does continue. I enjoyed that too. Phil doesn't know what we're talking about, but that's okay.
I don't.
Don't worry, neither does Matt.
Yeah. And then, so then the movie obviously wraps up, and we get some really beautiful credits. A lot of Pauline Baines' illustrations are included here in the credits. She had actually passed away prior to the filming of this movie, and so they included a lot of her illustrations there, which I loved. It reminded me of the illustrations at the very end of The Return of the King. I don't know if you've ever watched those through, but they have like each character and stuff. I love a good credits with lots of things to read besides words.
As well as a bit of rocking Carrie Underwood.
Yeah. Wait, is that who it is?
Yeah, There's a Place for Us. That's the song that's playing.
Oh, that's this. Okay. I'm not super familiar with the soundtrack, although actually, like the songs that are in it. But we haven't talked at all about this. But the soundtrack in this movie, I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think actually the soundtrack for all of the Narnia movies has been pretty solid.
And I think this could have been a place where we could have seen a dip in the quality because we switched composers, and David Arnold composed this movie, and I think he does a great job including a lot of the themes from the first two, but then he introduces a new theme for the Dawn Treader, which I really enjoy. He even includes like a little bit of percussion and a snare drum at the end of it, which just feels kind of like this sense of discovery with this. Is this like slight like danger in the background. So overall, I thought the music, this is probably actually my favorite soundtrack of the three.
I like how we're ending with some good notes. On a positive.
Literally.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about the end of this movie before we have kind of a section for concluding thoughts?
I think I've made all of my complaints.
And now, David, have you been answered?
My complaint was the answer.
Boom.
Okay, that is going to make no sense to anybody who hasn't read Till We Have Faces. So please come and listen to season 3 of Pints with Jack.
That's a great plug for your show.
Yeah, way to turn that into a plug. That was skillful.
So as we wrap up the movie here, we've now spent the actual length of the movie talking about the movie. So I don't know if we need to talk more about things we liked and disliked, because I think at this point listeners know how we feel about the movie.
Particularly me.
Exactly. I would love to know for y'all if we found out tomorrow they were remaking this movie and you were the director. What is one change you would make from the book in adapting this book to a movie? We're not talking about Netflix or anything yet. We can get to that in a minute. Are there any changes that you would make as a filmmaker as you adapt this book?
Yeah, you probably won't like my answer as much, but going back to part 1 that we talked about, stick closer to the script. I mean, I'm fine if people deviate, but there is a very, very, very high bar. And the times they deviated here really frustrated me. Stick to the script. And then the second thing would be, and I'm probably stealing this from you, Daniel, or what you were going to say, but really play out not the theme of saving the world, but the theme of discovery. And that could be, as you mentioned, the different islands when they combined them all. Maybe they lost a lot there. Maybe you separate those and play those out more. Maybe there's got to be a way to do it that's still enticing and not too slow. I just think they did it the easy way out.
Yeah.
I think I'm actually going to say I would do something that this movie did, which is collapse some of the islands into each other. I am totally okay with that, and I think that would streamline the story a little bit more to provide a little bit more forward thrust. In the episode when Matt and I spoke about the book, I compared it a little bit to Star Trek, particularly the original series, where it's very episodic. Okay, this week we're going to this planet where the women are blue. Now this week they're green. And so I think it would have been fine to collapse the islands in the way that they did Goldwater and Dragon, for example. Skip out some of the earlier ones. But I would say beyond that, stay more faithful to Lewis's dialogue and the tone a little bit more. And everything doesn't have to end with a big bad and a beam going up into the sky.
Yeah, I think I would do the same thing, just sticking a little closer to the source material, and definitely no mist. But also not feeling the need to have battles everywhere, because there aren't as many in this book.
Yeah, I think I've said this a couple of times as we've talked about this. I do think that what they were shooting at could have worked, but it just wasn't coherent. I just really don't think that they spent enough time with both the source material and what they themselves had written to think about, was this cohesive? Did this really hold together? Were the narrative arcs for the characters in the movie as a whole really solid? And instead it was just more of a confusing mess. I mean, the whole thing with Caspian's father, just every now and again there's something mentioned and it just goes nowhere.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of y'all's points, and since Matt already stole mine, I will change mine to, and I'll use it as a segue to our last little thing we'll do to wrap up here, which is that if I was the director, I would say we're no longer making a movie, we're doing a miniseries, because I really do believe that this book just doesn't work super well as a movie. I think it can work, but I think that ultimately it works best as an episodic story, where instead of exploring or saving the world, we're exploring different themes every episode. Make it like Star Trek, right? I mean, I'm not as familiar with the original series, but this could totally fit like a next generation model of let's explore something new every week, and there is maybe a season long theme that's happening, which is like we see in the book, but it's not about saving the world. It's about its small character moments and its exploration and discovery, and not and honestly, just to keep with my Star Trek thing, it's the same issue that Star Trek's having with a lot of the newer shows, where it's always about saving things and defeating bad guys, and not about going forth and exploring the universe, right? And so this is something that is probably hopefully going to be happening soon, because Netflix has the rights now to Narnia. Although we're not sure exactly what's going on. Douglas Gresham, even as recently as this past November, said that they're still in talks. He hasn't heard much, but that the plan is that it should be happening soon. I think we read The Hollywood Reporter, I think, said that it was like a 9-digit figure that they spent on the rights to Narnia, which is quite high, and so we can expect that there will be something. And I'd love to know, as we wrap up here, what are your hopes for this book in particular as a Netflix show or movie?
Well, now I'm going to steal from you and just say I think you nailed it with the concept of stringing out the different episodic scenes. There is a lot of incredible character development potential in this book, and journeys that people can relate to. And so the episodic way of doing it provides a fantastic opportunity to let the listener enter into that journey and that story.
Yeah, I'm going to steal yours as well. I think that's the main thing. When they're in Netflix and they've got the possibility of doing episodes, this book would work much more easily. I think my only other real desire for this book is for them to really nail the end. Because the final few chapters of this book, you suddenly go onto a different plane. It's a very different feel. You have a real sense of anticipation that where they're sailing is into something very strange and new and wonderful. And I pray if they try for that they do really nail it, because I reread the book in anticipation for this season, and there were some man tears right at the end. I want the Netflix season to do the same thing to me.
How about you, Phil?
Yeah, I was just thinking as Matt and David were talking about this, I'm very excited for an episodic version. I really like a lot of films, and I love the kind of 2 to 3 hour time frame that things work in, and I also love how much work goes into making everything kind of succinct and well paced and put together. But some of the things I've enjoyed most are when things can build on each other over a long period of time. So I've really enjoyed like a kind of 5 to 6 season set of episodes. I really think that works well, and this would fit. We know this would fit because we've gone chapter by chapter, and every chapter does kind of work like that. And I think that they'll probably combine them like we talked about before. But there's so much good stuff in here, and I think it needs a little longer than 2 to 3 hours. And I'm excited to see what they do there.
All right. Well, those are great thoughts. I know I am really excited for what Netflix does. I'm itching for more news. We haven't had any in a long time, and so hopefully this summer we'll get some news around the project. So, any final thoughts before we wrap up the show?
Hollywood, try harder next time. And I'm available for consulting.
Yeah, David will be watching. You might as well hire him.
I've actually often said that my ideal job would be proofreader, just because I would spend my days reading, finding other people's mistakes, telling them about them, and they thank me for it.
Well, David and Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about this movie with us. This has been so much fun over the course of both of these episodes to really break down this movie and just talk about Narnia and C.S. Lewis with y'all.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been a delight.
Yeah, it's been so fun to have you guys on. I'm glad you could make it.
All right. Well, this episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Elias Dean, Madeline Heising, Hannah Anderson, John Marr, and Emily Margaret for supporting us at the Care Paravel level. You can follow us into Narnia on our Twitter or Facebook pages, and if you have any feedback, you can email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. We'd always appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts because this helps other listeners find the show and join through our read-through. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the show in your favorite podcast app so you can wake up with a new episode every other Wednesday. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we'll be back next time with Chapter 1 of The Silver Chair.